Crimson Dusk Reward. Loretta Laurie Monroe had promised herself she'd never trust a man again, but when she found herself stranded with Rhett Dawson, a gunfighter with nothing left to lose, she had no choice. He sat by the fire, his sharp gaze never leaving hers. "You're scared of me," he murmured. "Smart girl. But fear won't keep you warm tonight." Chapter 1. A Broken Wagon and a Bleaker Promise. The sun beat down on the cracked earth, a relentless hammer against Loretta Laurie Monroe's already frayed nerves. Dust devils danced in the distance, mocking the stillness of her broken-down wagon. The splintered wheel lay beside it like a discarded hope, a stark reminder of her predicament. She'd been traveling for days, the vast expanse of the Arizona Territory swallowing her whole, each mile a testament to her foolish optimism. Now, here she was, stranded, the silence broken only by the mournful creak of the wagon's remaining wheels and the frantic beat of her own heart. Laurie ran a calloused hand through her dust-streaked auburn hair, pulling it back from her face. At 58, she wasn't the delicate flower she once was. Life on the frontier, and a particularly brutal marriage, had weathered her, etched lines of hardship around her kind, green eyes and the corners of her mouth. But beneath the surface, a stubborn ember of defiance still glowed. She'd promised herself, after burying Samuel, that she'd never rely on another man again. That promise, whispered over a cold, unforgiving grave, was all she had left. She kicked at the offending wheel, a futile gesture of frustration. "Damn fool wagon," she muttered, her voice raspy from thirst and despair. The vastness of the landscape pressed in on her, a tangible weight. She scanned the horizon, a desperate plea in her heart for something. Anything. But there was nothing but shimmering heat and the endless, unforgiving sky. A hawk circled overhead, its sharp cry piercing the silence. Laurie watched it, a strange sense of kinship stirring within her. A lone predator, surviving against the odds. She had to survive too. For herself. For the memory of the woman she once was, the woman Samuel had tried, and failed, to break. She retrieved her canteen, the meager slosh of water inside a cruel reminder of her dwindling resources. She took a small sip, savoring the coolness against her parched throat, then capped it tightly. Every drop was precious. Every moment counted. Hours crawled by. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a breathtaking spectacle that offered little comfort. Laurie huddled beneath the meager shade of the wagon, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She knew the dangers of the desert night, the chilling cold, the lurking predators, both animal and human. Just as despair began to truly take root, a flicker of movement caught her eye. A distant figure, riding a horse, emerged from the shimmering heat haze. Laurie's heart leaped, a mixture of hope and trepidation churning in her stomach. Help, perhaps? Or something far worse? The rider approached slowly, a silhouette against the setting sun. As he drew closer, Laurie could make out the details, a tall, lean figure, a wide-brimmed hat casting his face in shadow, a rifle slung across his back. The horse, a magnificent dark bay, moved with a weary grace that mirrored its rider. He reined in his horse a few yards from the wagon, his eyes, the color of a stormy sky, assessing her with a chilling intensity. He didn't speak, didn't offer a greeting, just sat there, a silent, imposing presence. Laurie straightened her shoulders, refusing to cower. She'd faced down worse than a dusty stranger. "Afternoon," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. He dismounted, the movement fluid and economical, the jingle of spurs the only sound. He walked toward her, his boots kicking up small puffs of dust. As he stepped into the fading light, she saw his face more clearly. It was a hard face, etched with the lines of a difficult life, a face that had seen too much. A jagged scar ran down his left cheek, a silent testament to a past he clearly carried with him. He looked to be in his late 40s, but his eyes held a weariness that seemed far older. "Broken wheel," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. It wasn't a question. Lori nodded, her gaze locked on his. It is. He examined the damage, his movements precise and efficient. He crouched down, running a calloused hand along the splintered wood. Can't be fixed, he said, straightening up. Not out here. Lori's heart sank. She knew it, but hearing him say it aloud made it all the more real. What am I supposed to do? She asked, the question tinged with a desperation she couldn't quite conceal. He looked at her, his gaze unwavering.
Depends, he said.
On what you're willing to do. Lori swallowed, her mouth suddenly dry. I don't understand. He gestured with his head towards the setting sun. Night's coming. This ain't a place to be alone. He paused, his eyes searching hers.
I can take you with me.
To Redemption Ridge. It's a few days' ride. Redemption Ridge. She'd heard whispers of the place. A haven for outlaws, some said. A place of last resort. A place where the law held little sway.
Herrgut clenched.
Trusting this man, this stranger, felt like stepping off a cliff into the unknown. But what choice did she have? He saw the hesitation in her eyes, the fear warring with the desperate need for survival. He didn't flinch, didn't try to reassure her. He simply waited, patient as the desert itself.
Why?
Lori asked, the word a whisper on the wind. Why would you help me? He shrugged, a slight movement of his broad shoulders. Don't rightly know, he said. Maybe I'm tired of seeing things break. He paused, his gaze softening, just a fraction. Maybe I see a bit of myself in you. Lori studied him, searching for any sign of deceit, any hint of malice. But his eyes, though guarded, held a strange kind of honesty, a weariness that resonated with her own. She thought of Samuel, of his cruelty, of the way he'd tried to break her spirit. And she thought of the promise she'd made. I don't trust easily, she said, her voice firm. He met her gaze, a flicker of something that might have been respect in his eyes. Neither do I. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words, with the weight of their respective pasts. The wind picked up, swirling dust around them, a tangible manifestation of the uncertainty that lay ahead. He extended a hand, calloused and strong. Name's Rhett Dawson, he said. Lori hesitated for a moment, then placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, reassuring. Loretta Monroe, she replied.
Lori.
He nodded, a slight inclination of his head. Lori, he repeated, her name sounding different on his tongue, like a fragile promise in the gathering dusk. He turned towards his horse. We need to leave.
Now.
As she looked at him, at the strength in his stance, the weariness in his eyes, and the faint glimmer of something she hadn't seen in a long time, hope, perhaps a different fear took root. It was the cold dread, the old feeling. She must suppress at all costs the one warning signal of a trust that she had vowed never to feel again. But it flickered unbidden, like the last embers of the dying sun. Chapter 2. The Devil's Bargain in the Desert. The ride was brutal. The desert, beautiful in its darkness, was unforgiving. The sun, a fiery eye in the vast blue, seemed to target Lori, testing her resolve with each passing hour. Rhett rode ahead, a silent sentinel, his presence both a comfort and a source of unease. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his words were clipped and to the point. Lori, perched precariously on the back of his horse, her arms wrapped around his waist, tried to ignore the constant ache in her muscles and the growing unease in her heart. She'd made a devil's bargain, trading one form of danger for another. She knew nothing about this man, this Rhett Dawson, except that he was an outlaw, or at least, that's what the rumors about Redemption Ridge suggested. And yet, she'd entrusted her life to him. She studied his back, the broad shoulders, the way his shirt stretched taut across his muscles. He rode with an easy grace, as if he were part of the horse, part of the landscape. He was a man of the West, through, and she was an outsider, a woman trying to find her place in a world that had little use for women alone. During a brief stop to water the horse, Lori dared to ask, "Why Redemption Ridge? Why are you going there?" Rhett turned, his eyes, shaded by his hat, were unreadable. "It's where I belong," he said simply. He didn't elaborate, and Lori didn't press him. Some questions were best left unasked, some doors best left unopened. He offered her some jerky, hard and salty, but surprisingly satisfying. They ate in silence, the only sound the wind whistling through the sparse vegetation. Lori watched him, trying to piece together the puzzle of this man. He was a contradiction, a mixture of harshness and something else. Something she couldn't quite define. "You said you saw a bit of yourself in me," Lori said, breaking the silence. "What did you mean?" Rhett looked at her, his gaze intense. "You're running," he said. "Just like me." Lori's breath caught in her throat. He saw right through her, saw the fear and the desperation she tried so hard to conceal. "I'm not running," she lied, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't argue, didn't press her. He simply said, "We all run from something, Lori. The trick is to know when to stop." His words hung in the air, a challenge, a truth she wasn't ready to face. She was running. Running from the ghost of Samuel, from the memories of his cruelty, from the life that had almost broken her. But where was she running to? As the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the desert, they reached a small, rocky outcrop. Rhett dismounted, his movements stiff. "We'll camp here for the night," he said. Lori slid off the horse, her legs wobbly from the long ride. She stretched, trying to ease the stiffness in her muscles. The silence of the desert was profound, broken only by the occasional rustle of a small creature or the sigh of the wind. Rhett built a small fire, the flames flickering to life, casting dancing shadows on the rocks. He seemed to know exactly what he was doing, his movements efficient and practiced. He was a man who was comfortable in the wilderness, a man who knew how to survive. They sat by the fire, the warmth a welcome relief against the growing chill of the night. Rhett shared his meager supplies, a can of beans and some more jerky. Lori ate gratefully, her hunger a sharp reminder of her vulnerability. "Tell me about Redemption Ridge," Lori said, her voice soft in the firelight. Rhett looked at her, his eyes reflecting the flames. "It's a place of second chances," he said. "For some."
He paused.
"And a place of final endings for others." His words sent a shiver down her spine. She sensed a darkness in him, a shadow of something he'd seen, something he'd done. She wondered what his second chance was, what his final ending might be. "And what about you, Lori?" he asked, his voice low. "What's your second chance?" She looked into the fire, the flames dancing in her eyes. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm still trying to figure that out." She hesitated. "I just want peace." He nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. "Peace is a hard thing to find in this world," he said. "Especially out here." They fell silent again, the fire crackling between them. Lori watched him, his face illuminated by the flickering light. He was a hard man, a dangerous man, perhaps. But she also saw a glimmer of something else, a hint of vulnerability, a shared understanding of loss and pain. As the night wore on, the fire burned low. Rhett offered her his bedroll, insisting she take it.
"He'd sleep under the stars," he said.
Lori protested, but he wouldn't hear of it. She lay down, wrapped in the rough wool, the scent of leather and smoke clinging to it. She stared up at the vast, star-studded sky, a million pinpricks of light in the infinite darkness. She felt small, insignificant, yet strangely free. She thought of Rhett, sleeping out there under the stars, a man who carried his own burdens, his own demons. She wondered what his story was, what had led him to this life, to this place. And she wondered if, perhaps, in this unlikely companionship, in this shared journey through the unforgiving desert, she might find not only a second chance, but also a connection, a flicker of hope in the darkness. She closed her eyes, the image of Rhett's weathered face, his stormy eyes, imprinted on her mind. Sleep came slowly, fitfully, punctuated by the sounds of the desert night and the unsettling, yet strangely comforting, presence of the man she had just met, the stranger who had, for reasons she couldn't comprehend, offered her a lifeline. She drifted off, wondering if she was foolish to trust him, or if the bargain would be a slow unwinding of their tattered souls. Chapter 3. shadows of trust and gun smoke. The second day of their journey was marked by a growing tension, an unspoken awareness that hung between them like the shimmering heat haze above the desert floor. Lori found herself constantly watching Rhett, studying his every move, trying to decipher the enigmatic man he was. He remained stoic, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his hand never far from the rifle slung across his back. They spoke little, the silence punctuated by the rhythmic thud of the horse's hooves and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. Lori's thoughts, however, were a whirlwind of questions and anxieties. She replayed her decision to trust him, second-guessing herself at every turn. Was she a fool to believe in the faint glimmer of decency she thought she saw in his eyes? During one of their infrequent stops, Lori noticed a small, worn book tucked into Rhett's saddlebag. Curiosity overcoming her caution, she asked, "What's that you're reading?" Rhett glanced at her, his expression guarded. He hesitated for a moment, then pulled the book out. It was a collection of poetry, the cover faded and cracked, the pages dog-eared and stained. Lori was surprised. It didn't seem to fit the image of the hardened gunfighter. He didn't offer it to her, didn't explain. He simply tucked it back into his saddlebag, his actions deliberate and careful. But the brief glimpse of that book, that unexpected vulnerability, shifted something in Lori's perception of him. It was a small crack in his armor, a hint of a soul beneath the rough exterior. As they rode, Lori noticed a change in the landscape. The flat, desolate expanse began to give way to rolling hills and rocky canyons. The vegetation grew thicker, offering glimpses of shade and the promise of water. Rhett seemed to know the terrain intimately, navigating the winding trails with an ease that spoke of long familiarity. Late in the afternoon, they came across a small, abandoned homestead. The cabin was dilapidated, the roof partially collapsed, the windows broken and boarded up. A rusted weather vane creaked mournfully in the wind. It was a scene of desolation, a reminder of the harsh realities of frontier life. Rhett dismounted, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "We'll rest here for a while," he said. "There's a well nearby. Should be water." Lori slid off the horse, her legs stiff and aching. She watched as Rhett went about the task of securing the horse and checking the perimeter. He moved with a quiet efficiency, his senses alert, his body tense. While he was gone, Lori explored the ruined cabin. The air inside was thick with dust and the smell of decay. She found a broken chair, its fabric torn and faded, and sat down, feeling a strange sense of sadness wash over her. She imagined the family who had once lived here, their hopes and dreams, their struggles and hardships. What had happened to them? Had they found their fortune, or had the frontier claimed them, as it had so many others? When Rhett returned, he found her sitting there, lost in thought. He didn't say anything, just handed her a canteen filled with fresh, cool water. Lori drank deeply, grateful for the relief. "Who do you think lived here?" she asked, her voice echoing in the stillness of the cabin. Rhett shrugged. "Doesn't matter," he said. "They're gone now." His words were blunt, but Lori sensed a deeper meaning beneath them. He was a man who understood loss, who knew the fragility of life. As they were preparing to leave, Lori noticed a glint of metal in the dirt near the cabin's entrance. She bent down and picked it up. It was a small, silver locket, tarnished and scratched, but still beautiful. She opened it carefully, revealing two tiny, faded portraits. One was of a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. The other was of a young man, his face full of hope and determination. Lori felt a pang of sadness. This locket, this small token of love and memory, was all that remained of a life, a family, a story. She closed the locket, holding it tight in her hand. She showed it to Rhett. He looked at it, his expression unreadable. "Keep it," he said. "Maybe it'll bring you luck." Lori tucked the locket into her pocket, a tangible reminder of the past, a symbol of hope and resilience. She wondered if it would bring her luck, or if it would simply serve as a reminder of the losses she had endured, the losses they both carried. As they rode away from the abandoned homestead, a sudden gunshot rang out. echoing through the canyons. Rhett instantly reined in his horse, his body tense, his eyes scanning the surroundings.
"Get down,"
he ordered, his voice sharp and urgent. Lori slid off the horse, her heart pounding in her chest. She crouched behind a large rock, her body trembling. Another shot rang out, closer this time. She saw Rhett draw his rifle, his movements swift and precise. He was a different man now, a warrior, his eyes cold and focused, his body a coiled spring ready to unleash. The shadows of trust they'd cautiously built seemed to shatter with the echoing gunshots, replaced by the stark reality of the dangerous world they inhabited. The air, once filled with the quiet promise of the desert, now crackled with the threat of violence and the unknown intentions of whoever was firing at them. Chapter 4. Whispers of Redemption and Ruin. Rhett returned fire, the sharp crack of his rifle echoing through the canyon. Lori, crouched behind the rock, her hands covering her ears, could only watch in terrified fascination. The gunfight was brief, but intense, a deadly dance of lead and shadow. She saw a figure fall from a nearby ridge, the body tumbling down the rocky slope before coming to rest in a crumpled heap. Silence descended, heavy and profound, broken only by the ragged breathing of Rhett and the frantic beat of Lori's heart. She waited, tense and trembling, for what felt like an eternity. Rhett slowly lowered his rifle, his eyes still scanning the surroundings. He approached the fallen figure cautiously, his gun still drawn. After a moment, he holstered his weapon, his posture relaxing slightly. He turned back to Lori, his face grim.
"Stay here," he said.
He walked back to the ridge, disappearing from view. Lori remained where she was, her body shaking, her mind reeling. She'd never witnessed such violence before. The image of the falling man, the sound of the gunshots, the smell of gunpowder, were seared into her memory. After what seemed like an hour, but was probably only a few minutes, Rhett returned. He was carrying a saddlebag, which he tossed onto the ground near Lori. "He won't be bothering anyone anymore," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. He didn't elaborate, didn't offer any explanation. Lori looked at him, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Who was he?" she asked. Rhett shrugged. "Just another lost soul," he said. "Looking for trouble." He began to saddle his horse, his movements efficient and practiced. Lori watched him, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. She had just witnessed a man kill another man, and she was traveling with that man, relying on him for her safety. Are you going to tell me what's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. Rhett stopped what he was doing and looked at her. His eyes, usually so guarded, held a flicker of something that might have been regret.
"There's nothing to tell," he said.
"It's over." But Lori knew it wasn't over. It was just beginning. The gunfight had shattered the fragile trust that had been building between them. It had revealed a side of Rhett she hadn't seen before, a side that both terrified and intrigued her. They rode in silence for the rest of the day, the tension between them palpable. Lori couldn't shake the image of the dead man, the violence she had witnessed. She wondered about Rhett, about the life he had led, the things he had done. As the sun began to set, they reached a small, secluded canyon. A narrow stream ran through it, its waters clear and cold. The air was cooler here, and the silence was less oppressive than on the open desert. Rhett dismounted, his movements stiff. "We'll camp here," he said. Lori slid off the horse, her body aching. She watched as Rhett unsaddled his horse and led it to the stream to drink. He moved with a quiet grace, his weariness evident in every line of his body. While he was tending to the horse, Lori walked to the stream and knelt down, cupping her hands and drinking deeply of the cool water. She splashed some on her face, trying to wash away the dust and the fear. She looked at her reflection in the water, a distorted image of a woman she barely recognized. She was tired, scared, and uncertain of what the future held. But she was also alive, and she was determined to survive. When Rhett returned, he found her sitting by the stream, staring into the water. He sat down beside her, not too close, but close enough. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said, his voice low. Lori looked at him, surprised by his apology.
It's not your fault, she said.
He shook his head.
It's always my fault, he said.
It's the life I've chosen. He paused, his gaze fixed on the flowing water. I've done things I'm not proud of, Lori, he said. Things I can't take back. Lori sensed the weight of his past, the burden he carried. She didn't know what he had done, but she knew it haunted him. We all have regrets, Rhett, she said.
Things we wish we could change.
He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. Do you believe in redemption, Lori? He asked. The question hung in the air, a whisper of hope in the gathering darkness. Lori thought of the locket she carried, the symbol of a lost love, a lost life. She thought of her own past, her own regrets.
I don't know, she said.
But I believe in second chances. He nodded, a slight movement of his head. Maybe that's all redemption is, he said. A second chance. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the gentle murmur of the stream. The tension between them began to ease, replaced by a shared understanding, a shared vulnerability. The whispers of redemption, however faint, seemed to mingle with the earlier whispers of ruin, creating a complex tapestry of hope and regret under the darkening sky. As the first stars began to appear, Lori felt the smallest seed of trust replant itself, fragile but persistent, in the soil of her wary heart. Chapter 5. The Ghost Town's Silent Secrets. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the air crisp and clean. The events of the previous day seemed like a distant nightmare, a fleeting glimpse of a world Lori hoped to leave behind. They packed their meager belongings and set off, the landscape gradually changing as they moved further into the foothills. Rhett was more talkative this morning, pointing out landmarks and sharing snippets of information about the territory. He spoke of the Native American tribes who had once roamed these lands, of the prospectors who had come seeking their fortunes, of the outlaws who had sought refuge in the hidden canyons. Lori listened intently, fascinated by his stories. She realized he was a wealth of knowledge, his understanding of the West far deeper than she had initially imagined. He was more than just a gunfighter, he was a historian, a storyteller, a survivor. As they rode, they came across a small, deserted mining town. The buildings were weathered and crumbling, the windows boarded up, the streets empty and silent. It was a ghost town, a relic of a bygone era, a testament to the boom and bust cycle of the frontier. This is Havenwood, Rhett said, his voice echoing in the stillness. Used to be a thriving town. Silver Strike, back in '78. Dried up faster than a puddle in July. Lori looked around, her eyes wide with wonder and sadness. She could almost hear the echoes of the past, the sounds of laughter and music, the clatter of wagons and the shouts of miners. Now, there was only silence, a silence that spoke volumes about the fleeting nature of fortune and the enduring power of the land. Rhett dismounted and led his horse through the deserted streets. Lori followed, her boots crunching on the broken glass and loose stones. They passed a saloon, its doors hanging open, its interior dark and dusty. They saw a general store, its shelves empty, its counter covered in a thick layer of grime. They passed a church, its steeple broken, its bells silent. What happened to everyone? Lori asked, her voice barely a whisper. Rhett shrugged. Some moved on, looking for the next strike.
Some died.
Some just disappeared. He stopped in front of a small, dilapidated building that had once been the town's assay office. He pushed open the door, revealing a room filled with dusty equipment and crumbling ledgers. My father used to work here, he said, his voice surprisingly soft. Lori looked at him, surprised. She hadn't expected this revelation, this glimpse into his past. Your father? She asked. Rhett nodded. He was an assayer.
Honest man.
Tried to make a living in a town full of crooks and dreamers. He ran his hand along a dusty table, his fingers tracing the outline of an old scale. He taught me everything he knew. About silver, about life, about the importance of integrity. Lori sensed a deep sadness in him, a longing for a past that was gone forever. She wondered what had happened to his father, what had led Rhett down a different path. What happened to him? She asked gently. Rhett's face hardened, his eyes clouding over.
He was killed, he said.
By a man who didn't like the results of an essay. He turned away, his body tense. Laurie knew he didn't want to talk about it anymore. It was a wound that was still raw, a pain he carried deep inside. They spent the rest of the day exploring the ghost town, uncovering fragments of its past. Laurie found a child's doll, its porcelain face cracked, its dress torn and faded. She found a rusted horseshoe, a symbol of good luck, long since abandoned. She found a faded photograph of a group of miners, their faces young and hopeful, their eyes full of dreams. Each discovery was a poignant reminder of the lives that had been lived here, the hopes that had been dashed, the dreams that had turned to dust. Laurie felt a growing connection to this place, to its history, to its silent secrets. As the sun began to set, they made camp in the deserted town square. Rhett built a fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on the crumbling buildings. They ate in silence, the only sound the crackling fire and the occasional howl of a coyote in the distance. After they had eaten, Rhett pulled out his book of poetry. He opened it to a marked page and began to read aloud, his voice low and resonant. Laurie listened, mesmerized by the words, by the beauty of the language, by the unexpected depth of the man who was reading them. He read a poem about loss, about the pain of remembering, about the enduring power of love. Laurie felt tears welling up in her eyes, tears for the lost souls of Havenwood, tears for Rhett's father, tears for her own losses, her own regrets. When he finished reading, he closed the book and looked at her. His eyes, reflecting the firelight, held a warmth she hadn't seen before. "Thank you," Laurie said, her voice choked with emotion. "That was beautiful." He nodded, a slight smile playing on his lips. "It helps," he said, "to remember." They sat in silence for a long time, the fire burning low. Laurie felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. She was still in danger, still uncertain of her future, but she was also connected to this place, to this man, to the shared human experience of loss and hope. The silent secrets of the ghost town seemed to whisper around them, tales of resilience and ruin, of lives lived and lost, and in those whispers, Laurie found a strange kind of comfort, a shared understanding with the man who carried his own ghosts beside her. The shared silence, now not of tension, but of reluctant companionship. Chapter 6. Kindred Spirits Under a Cruel Sky. The following days blurred together, a tapestry of sun-drenched landscapes, quiet conversations, and shared hardships. Laurie and Rhett fell into a rhythm, a comfortable routine that belied the unusual circumstances of their companionship. They rode together, ate together, slept under the same vast, star-studded sky. They were two strangers, bound by fate and circumstance, slowly becoming something more. Laurie learned more about Rhett, not through direct questioning, but through observation, through the snippets of information he revealed in casual conversation, through the way he interacted with the world around him. She learned that he was a skilled tracker, a keen observer, a man who understood the language of the land. He could read the signs of the desert, predict the weather, find water in the most unlikely places. She also learned that he was a man of contradictions. He was a gunfighter, capable of violence, yet he also possessed a deep sensitivity, a love for poetry, a respect for the natural world. He was a loner, yet he seemed to crave connection, a shared understanding. Rhett, in turn, seemed to be drawn to Laurie's quiet strength, her resilience, her unwavering spirit. He saw in her a kindred spirit, a woman who had endured hardship and emerged stronger, a woman who understood the value of survival. One evening, as they were sitting by the fire, Rhett said, "You remind me of my mother." Laurie looked at him, surprised. "Your mother?" she asked. Rhett nodded. "She was a strong woman, faced a lot of hardship, but she never gave up. She always had a smile for me, even when things were tough." He paused, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames. "She died when I was young. Consumption." Laurie felt a pang of sympathy for him. She understood the pain of losing a loved one, the emptiness it left behind. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He shrugged, a slight movement of his shoulders. "It was a long time ago," he said. "But you never really forget." They fell silent again, the fire crackling between them. Laurie wondered about his mother, about the life she had lived, the influence she had had on her son. She saw a glimmer of that influence in Rhett, in his kindness, in his respect for women, in his quiet strength. As they continued their journey, Laurie began to feel a growing sense of trust in Rhett. She still knew he was a dangerous man, a man with a past, but she also saw his humanity, his vulnerability, his capacity for compassion. She realized that she was no longer afraid of him. She was, in fact, beginning to care for him. One afternoon, they came across a small, clear stream. They stopped to water the horse and refill their canteens. Laurie decided to take advantage of the opportunity to wash her hair and clothes. She found a secluded spot behind some rocks and stripped down to her chemise. She waded into the cool water, shivering slightly, but grateful for the chance to clean herself. She washed her hair, scrubbing away the dust and grime, and then rinsed her clothes, spreading them out on the rocks to dry. As she was sitting there, enjoying the warmth of the sun on her skin, she heard a noise. She turned, her heart pounding, and saw Rhett standing a short distance away. He had been watching her. Laurie felt a flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. She quickly grabbed her clothes, holding them in front of her, trying to cover herself. Rhett didn't say anything. He just looked at her, his eyes dark and unreadable. Laurie felt a strange mixture of shame and something else. A flicker of desire, perhaps? He turned and walked away, disappearing behind the rocks. Laurie let out a shaky breath, her heart still racing. She quickly dressed, her cheeks still burning. When she rejoined Rhett, he didn't mention what had happened. He simply handed her a cup of coffee, his eyes avoiding hers. Laurie took the cup, her hand trembling slightly. They drank their coffee in silence, the tension between them palpable. Laurie wondered what he was thinking, what he was feeling. She wondered if he felt the same strange connection she did, the same pull, the same unspoken desire. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape, they made camp. They sat by the fire, the flames dancing between them, illuminating their faces. "Laurie," Rhett said, his voice low. He stopped, hesitating. Laurie looked at him, her heart beating faster. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between his desire and his demons. The cruel sky above seemed to press down on them, a silent witness to the burgeoning emotions neither could fully articulate. They were kindred spirits, drawn together by circumstance, but also separated by the invisible walls of their pasts, their fears, and the unspoken truths that simmered beneath the surface of their fragile companionship. He wanted to say something, she knew, but the words seemed caught in his throat, trapped by the weight of his history and the uncertainty of their future. Chapter 7. A past etched in bullet holes. Rhett cleared his throat, the sound rough in the quiet of the evening. He looked at Laurie, his stormy eyes searching hers, a mixture of longing and apprehension swirling within them. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper.
"About my past."
Laurie nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had known this moment was coming, had sensed the weight of his unspoken history, the secrets he carried. She braced herself, ready to hear whatever he had to say, ready to face the darkness that haunted him. He took a deep breath, his gaze dropping to the fire, as if gathering strength from the flickering flames. "I told you my father was killed," he began. "By a man named Cyrus Thorne." Laurie nodded, remembering the conversation in the ghost town. "Thorne was a powerful man," Rhett continued. "A wealthy landowner, a ruthless businessman. He controlled everything in that part of the territory, including the law." He paused, his hands clenching into fists. "My father," he discovered that Thorne was cheating his miners, skimming silver from their claims. He tried to expose him, but he trailed off, his voice choked with emotion. Laurie could see the pain in his eyes, the anger and the grief that still burned within him. "Thorne had him killed," Rhett said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Made it look like an accident. A mining cave-in. Lori gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She could only imagine the horror, the injustice, the rage that Rhett must have felt.
I was just a boy, Rhett said.
16 years old. I had nothing, no one. Thorn took everything from me. He looked at Lori, his eyes filled with a pain that was almost unbearable to witness.
I swore revenge, he said.
I swore I'd make him pay. Lori reached out and touched his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. His skin was rough and calloused, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. And did you? She asked softly. Rhett nodded, his gaze fixed on their joined hands. I spent years tracking him, he said. Learning to shoot, learning to fight, learning to survive. I became the man you see before you. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and shame. I killed him, Lori, he said. I shot him down in cold blood. Lori didn't flinch, didn't pull away. She understood. She understood the rage, the need for vengeance, the desire for justice. And after that? She asked. Rhett sighed, a long, weary sound. After that I was a wanted man. I had a price on my head. I've been running ever since. He looked at her, his eyes pleading for understanding, for forgiveness. That's why I'm going to Redemption Ridge, he said. It's the only place I can be safe. The only place where I might find some peace. Lori squeezed his hand, her heart aching for him. She saw the toll his past had taken, the scars it had left on his soul. She saw the man he had become, the man he was trying to be. I understand, she said. And I don't judge you. He looked at her, surprised by her acceptance, by her lack of condemnation. You don't? He asked. Lori shook her head. We all have things in our past we regret, she said. Things we wish we could change. But we can't. All we can do is try to be better, to learn from our mistakes, to move forward. She paused, her gaze locking with his. And you, Rhett Dawson, she said. You are a good man. Despite everything. He smiled, a faint, fleeting smile, but it was enough to light up his face, to soften the harsh lines etched by hardship and violence. They sat in silence for a long time, their hands still clasped together, the fire burning low. Lori felt a deeper connection to him now, a bond forged by shared pain, by shared understanding, by shared hope. His past, etched in bullet holes and stained with blood, was no longer a barrier between them, but a bridge, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, redemption was possible. The silence was no longer just comfortable, it was intimate, a silent acknowledgement of two damaged souls finding solace in each other's presence under the vast, indifferent sky. The revelation of his past, instead of pushing her away, had drawn her closer, a testament to the unexpected and often illogical pathways of the human heart. Chapter 8. The Price of Freedom and Forgiveness. The journey to Redemption Ridge continued, but the atmosphere between Lori and Rhett had shifted. The weight of his confession, instead of driving them apart, had drawn them closer. They spoke more freely now, sharing stories, dreams, and fears. Lori learned about his childhood, his love for horses, his fascination with the stars. Rhett learned about Lori's life before Samuel, her dreams of becoming a teacher, her love for books, her quiet determination to build a new life for herself. One afternoon, while they were resting by a small oasis, Lori asked, "Do you ever think about going back? About clearing your name?" Rhett looked at her, his expression thoughtful. Sometimes, he admitted. But it's not that simple. Thorn had powerful friends. They wouldn't let it go. And he hesitated. I'm not sure I deserve to be free. Lori frowned.
Don't say that, she said.
You did what you had to do. You avenged your father's death. Rhett shook his head. Vengeance isn't justice, Lori, he said. It's just another form of violence. It doesn't bring back the dead. It doesn't heal the wounds. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. I've lived with violence for too long, he said. I'm tired of it. I want something different. Lori understood. She saw the weariness in his soul, the longing for peace, the desire for a life free from fear and bloodshed. "Maybe Redemption Ridge will give you that," she said softly. He smiled, a faint, hopeful smile. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it's just another illusion." As they neared Redemption Ridge, the landscape became more rugged, more mountainous. The trails were narrow and treacherous, winding through deep canyons and over rocky passes. Rhett navigated them with ease, his knowledge of the terrain evident. One evening, they camped on a high plateau, overlooking a vast valley. The view was breathtaking, the mountains stretching out before them, their peaks painted in hues of orange and purple by the setting sun. Rhett built a fire, and they sat together, watching the sunset. Lori felt a sense of awe, a sense of wonder at the beauty of the world, at the vastness of the landscape. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Rhett nodded.
"It is," he said.
"But it's also cruel. Unforgiving." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset. "This land, it takes everything from you," he said. "Your dreams, your hopes, your loved ones. It leaves you with nothing but scars." Lori knew he was speaking not just of the land, but of his own life, his own losses. She reached out and touched his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. "But it also gives you something in return," she said. "Strength, resilience, the ability to survive." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "And you, Lori," he said, "you have all those things. In abundance." Lori felt a warmth spread through her, a feeling of being seen, of being understood. She realized that she was falling in love with this man, this outlaw, this wounded soul. And she knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that he was falling in love with her too. The next day, they reached Redemption Ridge. It was a small, isolated settlement, nestled in a hidden valley, surrounded by towering cliffs. The buildings were rough and unpainted, the streets dusty and unpaved. It was a place of last resort, a haven for outlaws and misfits, a place where the law held little sway. As they rode into town, Lori felt a sense of unease, a sense of apprehension. She saw the hard faces of the men and women who lined the streets, their eyes assessing them, judging them. She saw the guns strapped to their hips, the knives tucked into their boots. Rhett seemed unfazed. He rode with his head held high, his shoulders squared, his hand never far from his rifle. He was back in his element, a place where he belonged, a place where he was known. They stopped in front of a small, weathered building that served as the town saloon. A sign above the door read, "The Last Chance Saloon." Lori felt a shiver run down her spine. The name seemed fitting, a stark reminder of the precariousness of life in this place, the finality of choices made. The price of freedom, she realized, was often steep, and forgiveness, even steeper. As they dismounted, she wondered if Redemption Ridge would offer them a sanctuary or simply another battleground, another test of their newfound, fragile connection. The air was thick with unspoken tension, the weight of expectation, and the silent question of whether they could truly escape their pasts in this haven of outlaws. Chapter 9. Echoes of Loss in the Canyon's Embrace. The Last Chance Saloon was dimly lit, smoky, and filled with the murmur of low conversations and the clinking of glasses. The air was thick with the smell of whiskey, sweat, and stale tobacco. Lori felt a wave of unease wash over her as she entered, her hand instinctively reaching for Rhett's arm. He gave her a reassuring squeeze, his presence a comforting anchor in this unfamiliar and potentially dangerous environment. A burly man with a scarred face and a handlebar mustache stood behind the bar, polishing glasses with a dirty rag. He looked up as they approached, his eyes narrowing in assessment. "Dawson," he said, his voice gruff. "Didn't expect to see you back here." Rhett nodded. "Need a room, Silas," he said. "And supplies." Silas grunted, his gaze shifting to Lori. "Who's the woman?" "She's with me," Rhett said, his voice firm. There was a subtle warning in his tone, a clear message that Lori was under his protection. Silas didn't argue. He tossed a key onto the bar. "Room 3, he said. "Upstairs." Rhett took the key and led Lori through the crowded saloon to a narrow staircase at the back. The room was small and sparsely furnished, with a single bed, a rickety chair, and a wash basin. A dusty window overlooked the main street. Lori felt a sense of claustrophobia, a feeling of being trapped. She missed the open spaces of the desert, the vastness of the sky, the freedom of the trail. "It's not much," Rhett said, seeing her expression. "But it's safe." Lori nodded, trying to mask her unease. She knew he was doing his best, trying to protect her, trying to make her feel comfortable. They spent the next few days settling into Redemption Ridge. Rhett introduced Lori to some of the other residents, a motley crew of outlaws, drifters, and former miners. Some were wary, some were curious, some were openly hostile. Lori found herself drawn to a woman named Sarah, who ran the town's small general store. Sarah was a widow, her husband having been killed in a mining accident a few years earlier. She was a strong, independent woman with a kind heart and a sharp wit. Lori and Sarah spent hours talking, sharing stories, finding solace in each other's company. Sarah told Lori about the history of Redemption Ridge, about the men and women who had sought refuge there, about the dreams they had chased, the losses they had endured. "It's a hard place, this town," Sarah said. "But it's also a place of second chances, for those who are willing to take them." Lori thought of Rhett, of his desire for redemption, of his longing for peace. She wondered if he would find it here, in this haven for outlaws. One evening, Rhett took Lori for a walk outside of town, to a secluded canyon where a small stream flowed. The air was cool and crisp, and the silence was broken only by the gentle murmur of the water. They sat by the stream, watching the moon rise above the canyon walls. Lori felt a sense of peace, a sense of contentment she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Thank you," she said to Rhett, "for bringing me here." Rhett looked at her, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "I didn't do it for you, Lori," he said. "I did it for me." He paused, his gaze searching hers. "I needed you," he said. "I needed someone." Lori felt her heart swell with emotion. She reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines of his weathered cheek. "And I needed you, Rhett," she said softly. "More than you know." He leaned in and kissed her, his lips gentle and hesitant at first, then more urgent, more passionate. Lori responded, her arms wrapping around his neck, her body pressing against his. It was a kiss of longing, of need, of shared pain and shared hope. As they kissed, Lori felt the echoes of loss in the canyon's embrace, the ghosts of the past mingling with the promise of the future. She knew their journey was far from over, that dangers still lay ahead, but in that moment, under the watchful gaze of the moon, she felt a sense of belonging, a sense of connection, a sense of love. The canyon, a silent witness to countless stories of heartbreak and resilience, seemed to hold its breath, allowing the two lost souls to find solace in each other's arms, a temporary reprieve from the harsh realities of their world. The kiss deepened, a silent vow exchanged between two hearts seeking refuge and redemption in the wild, unforgiving landscape. Chapter 10. Betrayal's Bitter Sting. The fragile peace Lori and Rhett found in each other's arms was shattered a few days later. A group of riders arrived in Redemption Ridge, their horses dusty and tired, their faces grim. They were bounty hunters, led by a man named Jedediah Stone, a notorious tracker known for his ruthlessness and his unwavering pursuit of his prey. Lori saw them arrive from the window of her room, her heart sinking with dread. She recognized Stone from the wanted posters she had seen in other towns, posters that bore Rhett's likeness and offered a substantial reward for his capture, dead or alive. She rushed downstairs, finding Rhett in the saloon, talking to Silas. She grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with fear. "They're here," she whispered urgently. "Bounty hunters, led by Jedediah Stone." Rhett's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. He knew Stone, knew his reputation. He knew this was trouble. "Get to Sarah's," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Stay there. Don't come out until I come for you." Lori wanted to protest, to stay with him, but she knew he was right. She nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She ran to the general store, finding Sarah behind the counter. She quickly explained the situation, her voice trembling. Sarah ushered her to a back room, a small, hidden storage space behind a stack of flour sacks.
"Stay here," she said.
"And be quiet." Lori huddled in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the town outside. She heard shouts, the thud of boots, the clatter of horses. She heard gunshots, sharp and terrifying. She waited, tense and trembling, for what felt like an eternity. The silence that followed the gunshots was even more terrifying than the noise. Finally, she heard a voice, Rhett's voice, calling her name. She scrambled out of the hiding place, her heart leaping with relief. Rhett was standing there, his face bruised and bloodied, his clothes torn. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were filled with a fierce determination. "Are you all right?" Lori asked, rushing to him, her hands reaching out to touch his wounds. He nodded.
"They're gone," he said. "For now."
He explained that Stone and his men had stormed the saloon, looking for him. There had been a gunfight, several men had been killed, including Silas. Stone had escaped, vowing to return. Lori felt a wave of guilt wash over her. She knew Rhett was in danger because of her, because he had chosen to protect her. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "This is all my fault." Rhett shook his head.
"It's not your fault, Lori," he said. "It's my past."
"It finally caught up with me." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. "I have to leave, Lori," he said. "It's not safe for you here. Not with me." Lori's heart shattered. She couldn't bear the thought of losing him, of being alone again. "No," she said, shaking her head. "I won't let you go. I'm staying with you." Rhett tried to protest, to reason with her, but she wouldn't listen. She was determined to stay by his side, no matter the cost. As they were arguing, Sarah interrupted them. "There's something you need to know," she said, her voice grave. She explained that she had overheard a conversation between Stone and one of the other men in town, a man named Jake, who had been Rhett's friend, or so Lori thought. Jake had betrayed Rhett, had told Stone where to find him, in exchange for a share of the reward. Rhett was stunned, his face paling. He couldn't believe that Jake, a man he had trusted, a man he had considered a friend, had betrayed him. Betrayal's bitter sting cut deeper than any bullet wound. Lori saw the pain in his eyes, the hurt and the anger. She felt a surge of fury towards Jake, towards the treachery that had shattered their fragile peace. "We have to leave," Rhett said, his voice filled with a new urgency.
"Now.
Before Jake tells Stone where to find you." They gathered their belongings, preparing to flee Redemption Ridge, the place that had promised sanctuary but had delivered only betrayal. As they slipped out of town under the cover of darkness, Lori looked back at the flickering lights, at the shadows of the buildings, at the place where she had found love and lost it, all in the span of a few short weeks. The dream of Redemption Ridge had turned into a nightmare, a stark reminder of the dangers that lurked around every corner, the betrayals that could cut deeper than any blade. They were on the run again, two fugitives bound by love and loss, fleeing the consequences of a past that refused to stay buried. Chapter 11. The Sheriff's Crooked Badge. Their flight from Redemption Ridge was desperate and fraught with peril. They rode through the night, pushing their horses to their limits, trying to put as much distance as possible between themselves and Jedediah Stone. They knew he wouldn't give up, that he would be tracking them relentlessly. Rhett was withdrawn and silent, the betrayal by Jake weighing heavily on him. Lori tried to comfort him, to offer him words of encouragement, but he seemed lost in his own thoughts, his own pain. As dawn broke, they found themselves in a small, dusty town called Haven's End. It was a desolate place, a collection of ramshackle buildings huddled around a single, muddy street. The air was thick with the smell of despair and decay. They decided to stop for a few hours, to rest their horses and replenish their supplies. They found a small, run-down stable on the outskirts of town, where they could hide their horses and catch a few hours of sleep. Lori watched Rhett as he tended to the horses, his movements mechanical and emotionless. She saw the exhaustion etched on his face, the lines of worry around his eyes. She knew he was hurting, both physically and emotionally. "Rhett,"
she said softly. Talk to me.
He looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. I don't know what to say, Lori, he said. I trusted him. I thought he was my friend. Lori reached out and touched his hand.
I know, she said.
And it hurts. But you can't let it break you. He sighed, a long, weary sound. I'm tired, Lori, he said. Tired of running, tired of fighting, tired of losing. Lori put her arms around him, holding him close. She felt his body tremble against hers, his pain a tangible presence. We'll get through this, she said. Together. They stayed in the stable for a few hours, trying to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. The fear of being caught, the constant threat of danger, kept them on edge. In the late afternoon, they decided to venture into town to get some supplies. They found a small general store, its shelves sparsely stocked, its owner a weary-looking woman with tired eyes. As they were gathering their supplies, a man entered the store. He was tall and imposing, with a stern face and a silver star pinned to his chest. He was the sheriff. Lori felt a surge of apprehension. She had a bad feeling about this man, a sense of unease that settled in the pit of her stomach. The sheriff looked at them, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. You passing through? He asked, his voice gruff. Rhett nodded. Just getting some supplies, he said. The sheriff's gaze lingered on Rhett, his eyes scrutinizing him. You look familiar, he said. Have I seen you before? Rhett shook his head. I don't think so, he said. The sheriff didn't seem convinced. He continued to stare at Rhett, his hand resting on the butt of his gun. Lori felt a cold dread creep up her spine. She knew this was a dangerous situation, that one wrong word, one wrong move, could lead to disaster. Suddenly, the sheriff's eyes widened in recognition. I know you, he said. You're Rhett Dawson. Wanted for murder. He drew his gun, his movements swift and practiced.
You're under arrest, he said.
Rhett reacted instantly, his own gun appearing in his hand as if by magic. He didn't want to shoot, didn't want to kill another man, but he had no choice. The two men faced each other, their guns drawn, their eyes locked in a deadly standoff. Lori watched in horror, her heart pounding in her chest. Before either man could fire, a shot rang out from outside the store. The sheriff staggered backward, his eyes wide with surprise, a crimson stain spreading across his chest. He collapsed to the floor, his gun clattering beside him. Rhett and Lori looked at each other, stunned. They hadn't fired the shot. Who had? They cautiously approached the door, peering outside. They saw a figure standing in the street, a rifle in their hands. It was Sarah from Redemption Ridge. Sarah lowered her rifle, her face grim. He was working with Stone, she said. He was going to turn you in for the reward. The sheriff's crooked badge, now stained with his own blood, was a stark symbol of the corruption that permeated the frontier, the betrayal that lurked around every corner. Lori and Rhett exchanged a look of disbelief and gratitude, realizing that Sarah had not only saved their lives, but had also exposed another layer of deceit in their already complicated situation. They were not just running from bounty hunters, but from a web of corruption that seemed to stretch across the territory. Chapter 12. A Dance with Danger and Desire. Sarah's unexpected arrival and the revelation of the sheriff's treachery added another layer of complexity to their already precarious situation. They knew they couldn't stay in Haven's End, that it was only a matter of time before Stone and his men caught up with them. We have to get out of here, Rhett said, his voice urgent.
Now.
They gathered their supplies, Sarah joining them, her rifle slung across her back. She explained that she had followed them, suspecting that Jake's betrayal might not be the end of their troubles. She had been right. They rode through the night, the three of them, bound by a shared danger, a shared determination to survive. Sarah proved to be a valuable ally, her knowledge of the territory and her skills with a rifle matching Rhett's. Lori felt a growing sense of admiration for Sarah, for her courage, her loyalty, her unwavering spirit. She also felt a pang of jealousy, a flicker of insecurity. She saw the way Rhett looked at Sarah, the respect and camaraderie they shared. She wondered if he saw Sarah as more than just a friend, if he saw her as a woman he could have a future with. As they rode, Lori couldn't shake the feeling that she was an outsider, a burden, a woman who didn't belong in this world of guns and violence. She was a woman of books and dreams, of quiet strength and resilience, but she was also a woman who had fallen in love with an outlaw, a man who lived on the edge of danger. One evening, as they were making camp, Lori found herself alone with Sarah. She decided to confront her feelings, to ask the question that had been weighing on her mind. "Do you have feelings for Rhett?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Sarah looked at her, her eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and understanding. "Rhett is a good man," she said, "and I care for him, but not in the way you think." She paused, her gaze softening. "He's in love with you, Lori," she said. "Can't you see that?" Lori felt a wave of relief wash over her, a lifting of the burden she had been carrying. But she also felt a sense of uncertainty, a fear of the future. "But what kind of future can we have?" she asked. "He's a wanted man. We're always running, always hiding." Sarah smiled. A sad, knowing smile. "Love doesn't always follow the rules, Lori," she said. "It doesn't always make sense. It just is." She put her hand on Lori's arm. "You have to decide what you're willing to fight for," she said. "What you're willing to risk." Lori thought about Sarah's words, about the love she felt for Rhett, about the dangers they faced. She knew she couldn't live without him, that she was willing to risk everything to be with him. That night, as she lay beside Rhett under the stars, she told him how she felt. She told him that she loved him, that she wanted to be with him, no matter what. Rhett held her close, his arms wrapping around her, his body warm against hers. He kissed her, a long, slow kiss that spoke of his love, his gratitude, his desire. "I love you too, Lori," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "More than anything." He paused, his gaze searching hers. "But I won't ask you to live this life with me," he said. "It's too dangerous. Too uncertain." Lori shook her head. "I'm not asking for a guarantee, Rhett," she said. "I'm asking for a chance. A chance to be with you, to build a life together, whatever that life may be." Rhett looked at her, his eyes filled with a love that was both fierce and tender. He knew she was right, that they couldn't let fear dictate their lives, that they had to take a chance on love, on each other. They made love under the stars, a passionate, desperate act of defiance against the dangers that surrounded them, a celebration of their love, their commitment, their shared hope for a future that was anything but certain. It was a dance with danger and desire, a blending of fear and passion, a testament to the enduring power of love in a world filled with violence and uncertainty. The vast, uncaring sky bore witness to their vulnerability and their strength, their whispered promises a fragile counterpoint to the harsh realities of their existence. Chapter 13. Scars that bind and break. The following days were a blur of relentless travel and growing unease. They were constantly looking over their shoulders, knowing that Jedediah Stone and his bounty hunters were still out there, hunting them. The pressure began to take its toll, fraying their nerves and testing the bonds of their fragile alliance. Rhett became increasingly withdrawn, haunted by the betrayal of Jake and the constant threat of capture. He pushed himself harder, driving them relentlessly, his focus narrowed to survival. Lori tried to reach him, to break through his walls of silence and pain, but he seemed to be slipping away from her, lost in his own world of regret and fear. She felt a growing sense of desperation, a fear that she was losing him, not to the law, but to the demons of his past. Sarah, ever observant, noticed the growing distance between Lori and Rhett. She tried to mediate, to offer words of comfort and advice, but the tension was palpable, a thick, suffocating presence that hung over them like a storm cloud. One evening, as they were making camp in a desolate canyon, Rhett exploded. He lashed out at Lori, his words harsh and cutting, accusing her of slowing him down, of putting them all in danger. Lori was stunned by his outburst, hurt by his words. She tried to defend herself, to reason with him, but he wouldn't listen. He was beyond reason, consumed by his own anger and frustration. "I should have left you in Redemption Ridge," he said, his voice filled with bitterness. "You're nothing but a burden." Lori felt her heart break. His words were like a knife twisting in her gut, a cruel rejection of the love she had offered him so freely. Tears streamed down her face as she turned and walked away, her body shaking with sobs. She stumbled through the darkness, her vision blurred, her heart aching. Sarah found her a short distance away, sitting on a rock, her head in her hands. She sat beside her, offering a comforting presence, a silent understanding. "He doesn't mean it, Lori," Sarah said softly. "He's just scared. And hurting." Lori shook her head. "He's right," she said. "I am a burden. I don't belong here. I should never have come with him." Sarah put her arm around Lori, holding her close. "Don't say that," she said. "You love him. And he loves you. That's all that matters." They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound Lori's quiet sobs. The canyon walls seemed to echo her pain, amplifying the sense of isolation and despair. Meanwhile, Rhett was battling his own demons. He regretted his words, his outburst, the way he had hurt Lori. He knew he had been unfair, that he had lashed out at her out of his own fear and frustration. He walked back to the camp, his heart heavy with guilt. He found Sarah sitting alone, her expression grim. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice filled with apprehension. Sarah pointed towards the darkness. "She's hurting, Rhett," she said. "You hurt her deeply." Rhett felt a wave of shame wash over him. He knew he had to make things right, to apologize, to beg for her forgiveness. He found Lori sitting by the stream, her back to him. He approached her slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. "Lori," he said softly. "I'm so sorry." She didn't respond, didn't turn around. He knelt down beside her, his hand reaching out to touch her shoulder.
"Please," he said.
"Look at me." She slowly turned, her face streaked with tears, her eyes filled with pain. Rhett felt his heart ache at the sight of her suffering, at the knowledge that he had caused it. He took her hands in his grip gentle but firm. "I didn't mean it, Lori," he said. "I was wrong. I was scared. I let my fear get the better of me." He looked at her, his eyes pleading for forgiveness. "You're not a burden, Lori," he said. "You're my strength. You're the only thing that keeps me going." Lori searched his eyes, looking for any sign of deceit, any hint of insincerity. But she saw only truth, only love, only regret. The scars of their pasts, both visible and hidden, seemed to bind them together, but also threatened to break them apart. The emotional wounds, inflicted in a moment of fear and anger, were a stark reminder of the fragility of their relationship, the constant struggle to overcome the demons that haunted them. It was a long, arduous path to forgiveness, a slow mending of the trust that had been shattered by his harsh words. Chapter 14. The Unforgiving Truth of Oaths. Lori's forgiveness was slow in coming, the wound Rhett had inflicted deep and painful. She listened to his apologies, his pleas for understanding, but the hurt lingered, a shadow over their fragile reconciliation. She knew he was sincere, that he regretted his words, but the damage had been done. They continued their journey, the tension between them a palpable presence. They spoke little, the easy camaraderie they had once shared replaced by a strained silence. Rhett tried to make amends, to show her his love and remorse through small gestures, a gentle touch, a shared glance, a cup of coffee brewed over the morning fire. Sarah, ever the watchful observer, tried to bridge the gap between them, to offer words of encouragement and support. She understood the complexities of their relationship, the challenges they faced, the burdens they carried. One afternoon, as they were riding through a narrow pass, they were ambushed. A hail of bullets rained down on them from the cliffs above, the sound echoing through the canyon. It was Jedediah Stone and his men, their relentless pursuit finally catching up with them. Rhett reacted instantly, pushing Lori off her horse and into the cover of some rocks. He returned fire, his movements swift and precise, his aim deadly. Sarah joined the fight, her rifle cracking alongside Rhett's. Lori huddled behind the rocks, her heart pounding in her chest, her body trembling with fear. She watched as Rhett and Sarah fought, their courage and skill a testament to their survival instincts. The gunfight was intense and brutal, a deadly dance of lead and shadow. Laurie saw one of Stone's men fall from the cliff, his body tumbling down the rocky slope. She saw another man clutch his chest, a crimson stain spreading across his shirt. Suddenly, a bullet struck Rhett, grazing his arm. He cried out in pain, his arm momentarily dropping. Laurie screamed, her heart leaping into her throat. Seeing Rhett wounded, something snapped inside Laurie. She couldn't stand by and watch him die, couldn't bear the thought of losing him. She grabbed a rifle that had fallen from one of the dead bounty hunters, her hands shaking, her heart pounding. She had never fired a gun before, had never even held one. But she knew she had to do something, had to help Rhett, had to fight for their survival. She took aim, her finger trembling on the trigger. She fired, the recoil jarring her shoulder. She missed, the bullet striking the rock face above Stone's head. But her shot had a surprising effect. It distracted Stone, momentarily breaking his concentration. Rhett seized the opportunity, firing a shot that struck Stone in the shoulder. Stone cried out in pain, dropping his gun. He scrambled back, his face contorted with rage and frustration. He signaled to his remaining men, and they retreated, disappearing over the ridge. The gunfight was over. Silence descended, heavy and profound, broken only by the ragged breathing of Rhett and Sarah and the frantic beat of Laurie's heart. Rhett slumped against the rocks, his arm bleeding, his face pale. Laurie rushed to him, her fear and relief overwhelming. "You're hurt," she said, her voice trembling. She tore a strip of cloth from her petticoat and began to bandage his wound. Rhett looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "You saved me, Laurie," he said. "You shot at Stone." Laurie nodded, her tears flowing freely now. "I couldn't let him hurt you," she said. "I couldn't lose you." Rhett reached out and touched her face, his fingers gently wiping away her tears. "I love you, Laurie," he said. "More than anything." In that moment, all the hurt, all the anger, all the resentment melted away. Laurie forgave him, completely and unconditionally. She knew that his love for her was true, that his actions had been born of fear and desperation, not malice. The ambush, the violence, the near-death experience had brought them closer than ever before. The unforgiving truth of their oaths, their promises to each other, had been tested in the crucible of fire, and their love had emerged stronger, more resilient. The shared danger had stripped away the lingering doubts and resentments, revealing the raw, unyielding core of their connection. They had faced death together, and in doing so, had found a deeper, more profound understanding of each other and their love. The shared experience, the adrenaline, and the relief washed away the remnants of their argument, solidifying their bond. Chapter 15. Running from Ghosts, Finding Hope. With Jedediah Stone temporarily thwarted, but still a looming threat, they knew they had to keep moving. Rhett's arm was injured, but he insisted he could ride. Laurie tended to his wound as best she could, her concern for him deepening their rekindled bond. They decided to head towards the mountains, seeking refuge in the higher elevations, where it would be harder for Stone and his men to track them. The terrain was rough and unforgiving, the journey arduous, but they pressed on, driven by a shared determination to survive and a renewed hope for a future together. As they rode, Laurie reflected on her transformation. She had arrived in the West a broken woman, seeking only peace and solitude. She had found danger, violence, and a love she never expected. She had discovered a strength she didn't know she possessed, a courage that had surprised even herself. She was no longer the same woman who had arrived in Arizona with a broken wagon and a bleaker promise. She had faced death, had fought for her life, had found love in the most unlikely of places. She had become a woman of the West, a survivor. One evening, as they were camped in a high mountain meadow, surrounded by towering pines and a breathtaking view of the valley below, Rhett spoke of his plans for the future. "I'm tired of running, Laurie," he said. "I want to find a place where we can settle down, where we can be safe, where we can build a life together." Laurie looked at him, her heart filled with hope. "What kind of place?"
she asked.
Rhett smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes.
"I've heard of a valley," he said.
"Far north of here, in Montana Territory. It's said to be beautiful. Fertile land, plenty of water, good for ranching." He paused, his gaze searching hers. "I want to raise horses, Lori," he said. "That's always been my dream. And I want you to be there with me, as my wife." Lori's breath caught in her throat. She had never dared to dream of such a future, of a life with Rhett, of marriage, of a home. Tears welled up in her eyes, tears of joy, of gratitude, of love. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you." Rhett pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, his body warm against hers. He kissed her a long, tender kiss that sealed their promise, their commitment, their shared hope for a new beginning. They spent the next few days making plans, dreaming of their future, of the ranch they would build, the horses they would raise, the life they would share. They knew it wouldn't be easy, that challenges still lay ahead, but they were confident that they could face them together, that their love would give them the strength to overcome any obstacle. As they continued their journey north, they encountered other travelers, pioneers heading west, seeking their own fortunes, their own dreams. Lori and Rhett shared their story with some of them, finding a sense of camaraderie, a shared understanding of the hardships and the hopes of frontier life. One evening, they met an old prospector, a grizzled veteran of the West, who told them stories of the Montana Territory, of its beauty, its challenges, its opportunities. He confirmed Rhett's belief that it was a place where a man could make a new start, where a woman could find a home. The prospector also warned them of the dangers, of the harsh winters, of the conflicts with Native American tribes, of the outlaws who still roamed the territory. But Lori and Rhett were undeterred. They had faced danger before, and they would face it again, together. As they neared the Montana Territory, they felt a sense of anticipation, a sense of excitement. They were running from ghosts, from the shadows of their past, but they were also running towards something, towards a future, towards a hope, towards a love that had blossomed in the most unlikely of circumstances. They were finding hope in the vastness of the landscape, in the promise of a new beginning, in the unwavering belief that their love could conquer all. The rugged terrain mirrored their journey, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of love. Chapter 16. A Stand Against the Dying Light. Their arrival in Montana Territory was met with a breathtaking vista. The rolling hills, vast plains, and towering mountains, painted in the hues of early autumn, filled them with a sense of awe and promise. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and the distant murmur of a rushing river. It felt like a new world, a place where they could finally shed the burdens of their past and build a new life. They found a small, secluded valley, nestled between two mountain ranges, with a clear stream running through it. It was exactly as Rhett had described, a perfect place to build their ranch, to raise their horses, to start their new life. They began to work immediately, clearing land, building a small cabin, preparing for the coming winter. They worked side by side, their love for each other fueling their efforts, their shared dream a tangible presence. Sarah, who had decided to stay with them, proved to be an invaluable asset. Her knowledge of farming and her practical skills complemented Rhett's experience with horses and Lori's determination to create a home. They faced challenges, of course. The work was hard, the weather unpredictable, the resources limited. But they persevered, their spirits lifted by the beauty of their surroundings and the strength of their bond. One evening, as they were sitting by the fire, enjoying a simple meal, they heard the sound of approaching horses. They tensed, their hands reaching for their weapons. It could be anyone, settlers, Native Americans, or worse, Jedediah Stone and his men. The riders emerged from the darkness, their faces obscured by the shadows. Rhett stood up, his rifle at the ready. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice firm. A voice answered, a voice Lori recognized. "It's me, Rhett."
"Jake."
Rhett lowered his rifle, his expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. Jake, the man who had betrayed him, had found them. Jake dismounted, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. He looked weary and remorseful, his clothes dusty and torn.
"I came to warn you," he said. "Stone is still out there. He's obsessed with finding you.
He's got more men now. And he's close." Rhett stared at him, his eyes filled with suspicion. "Why should I believe you?" he asked. "You betrayed me once." Jake nodded, his head hanging in shame. "I know," he said. "And I regret it more than anything. I was a fool. I let greed get the better of me." He looked at Rhett, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I came to make amends," he said.
"To help you if I can."
Lori saw the sincerity in Jake's eyes, the genuine remorse in his voice. She believed him. She knew that people could make mistakes, that they could be redeemed. "What do you suggest?" Lori asked. Jake explained that Stone and his men were camped a few miles away, planning to attack at dawn. He suggested that they set a trap, use the terrain to their advantage, ambush the ambushers. Rhett was hesitant, still wary of Jake's intentions. But Lori and Sarah convinced him to trust Jake, to give him a chance to prove his loyalty. They spent the rest of the night preparing, setting traps, positioning themselves strategically among the rocks and trees. They were outnumbered, but they had the advantage of surprise and the knowledge of the terrain. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky, Stone and his men attacked. They rode into the valley, confident of victory, unaware of the trap that awaited them. Rhett, Lori, Sarah, and Jake sprang their ambush, firing from their hidden positions. The sound of gunfire echoed through the valley, a fierce and desperate battle erupting. It was a stand against the dying light, a fight for their future, for their love, for their new life. They fought with courage and determination, their skills honed by years of hardship and survival. The initial surprise gave them an advantage, but Stone's men were numerous and well-armed. The battle raged, the outcome uncertain. Lori, fighting alongside Rhett, felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She was no longer the timid woman she had once been. She was a warrior, fighting for the man she loved, for the life they had dreamed of. The valley, once a symbol of hope and peace, became a battleground, a testament to the enduring struggle between good and evil, between the past and the future. Chapter 17. The weight of his past, her future. The battle raged, a chaotic mix of gunfire, shouts, and the screams of the wounded. Lori fought with a fierce determination she never knew she possessed, her fear replaced by a cold, hard focus. She saw Rhett, his face grim, his movements precise, a deadly force against the men who sought to destroy their dream. Sarah fought alongside them, her rifle skills honed by years of frontier life. Jake, too, proved his worth, fighting bravely, redeeming himself in the eyes of the man he had betrayed. One by one, Stone's men fell, their numbers dwindling under the relentless fire from the defenders. But Stone himself remained, a formidable opponent, his eyes filled with a cold, hard hatred. Rhett and Stone faced each other, their guns drawn, their bodies tense. They were two men locked in a deadly conflict, their pasts colliding in this remote valley. "It ends here, Dawson," Stone snarled, his voice filled with venom. Rhett nodded, his expression grim. "It does," he said. They fired, their shots echoing through the valley. Stone staggered backward, his hand clutching his chest, a crimson stain spreading across his shirt. He collapsed to the ground, his eyes staring up at the sky, his life ebbing away. Rhett stood there, his gun still smoking, his body trembling with the aftermath of the battle. He had killed Stone, the man who had haunted his past, the man who had threatened his future. But the victory felt hollow. The weight of his past, the burden of the lives he had taken, pressed down on him. He had sought peace, had sought redemption, but violence still followed him, still clung to him like a shadow. Lori rushed to him, her arms wrapping around him, her body holding him close. She felt his pain, his weariness, his despair. "It's over, Rhett," she said softly. "It's finally over." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. "Is it?" he asked. Can we ever truly escape our past? Lori didn't have an answer. She knew that the scars of the past would always be with them, that the memories would linger, that the ghosts would never completely disappear. But she also knew that they had each other, that their love was a powerful force, a beacon of hope in the darkness. They could build a new life, a life free from violence, a life filled with love and peace. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting its golden rays over the valley, they surveyed the aftermath of the battle. The bodies of Stone's men lay scattered across the ground, a grim reminder of the cost of their freedom. Jake, who had been wounded in the fight, lay on the ground, his face pale. Sarah was tending to his wounds, her expression worried. Rhett knelt down beside Jake, his hand reaching out to touch his shoulder.
"Thank you," he said.
"You saved our lives." Jake smiled weakly. "I owed you that much," he said. "And more." Lori looked at the scene before her, at the carnage, at the pain, at the loss. She felt a profound sadness, a sense of the futility of violence, the enduring tragedy of human conflict. But she also felt a surge of hope, a belief in the possibility of redemption, in the power of love to overcome even the darkest of pasts. She looked at Rhett, his face still etched with sorrow, but his eyes reflecting a glimmer of hope, a flicker of peace. They had survived. They had fought for their future, for their love, for their new life. And they had won. But the victory was bittersweet, a reminder of the weight of his past and the uncertainty of her future, their future, together. They knew the road ahead would not be easy, that challenges still awaited them, but they were determined to face them together, to build a life worthy of the sacrifices they had made. The valley, scarred by battle, would slowly heal, and so would they, their love a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. The question was not whether they could escape the past, but if they could build a future despite it. Chapter 18. Blood on the sand, tears in the dust. The aftermath of the battle was a somber affair. They buried the dead, friend and foe alike, marking their graves with simple wooden crosses. The silence of the valley was broken only by the mournful sigh of the wind and the quiet sobs of Lori as she helped tend to the wounded Jake. Rhett was withdrawn, the weight of Stone's death heavy on his shoulders. He had killed before, but this time it felt different. This time it was personal, a culmination of years of hatred and vengeance. He wondered if he had truly found peace, or if he had simply traded one form of violence for another. Lori tried to reach him, to offer him comfort, but he seemed lost in his own thoughts, his own guilt. She understood his pain, his struggle, but she also feared that it would consume him, that it would drive them apart. Jake, despite his injuries, was recovering. Sarah's care and Lori's constant attention had helped him pull through. He was filled with remorse for his past actions, grateful for the second chance he had been given. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, Rhett sat alone by the stream, his gaze fixed on the flowing water. He felt a presence beside him and looked up to see Lori. She sat down beside him, not speaking, simply offering her silent support. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. "I don't know what to do, Lori," he said, his voice filled with despair. "I thought killing Stone would bring me peace, but it hasn't. I still feel empty." Lori squeezed his hand, her eyes filled with compassion. "Peace doesn't come from killing, Rhett," she said. "It comes from within. It comes from forgiveness, from letting go of the past." She paused, her gaze searching his. "You have to forgive yourself, Rhett," she said. "You have to forgive yourself for the things you've done, for the life you've led. Only then can you truly move on." Rhett looked at her, his eyes filled with tears. He knew she was right, that he had been carrying the burden of his past for too long, that it was time to let it go. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, his body trembling. He buried his face in her hair, his tears soaking her shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Lori," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "For everything. For putting you in danger, for the pain I've caused you, for the life I've dragged you into." Lori held him tight, her own tears flowing freely.
"It's all right, Rhett," she said. "It's all right. We're together. That's all that matters." They sat there for a long time, holding each other, their tears mingling with the waters of the stream. It was a moment of catharsis, of release, of healing. As the darkness deepened, they walked back to the cabin, their arms around each other, their steps slow and deliberate. They had shed blood on the sand, tears in the dust, but they had also found a deeper connection, a stronger bond, a renewed commitment to each other and to their future. The pain of the past was still there, a lingering shadow, but it was no longer the defining force in their lives. They had faced their demons, had confronted their ghosts, and had emerged, scarred but not broken, ready to build a new life, a life based on love, forgiveness, and hope. The valley, once a scene of violence and death, was now a place of healing, a sanctuary, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to overcome even the most devastating of circumstances. They still had much to do, much to build, but with the burden slightly lifted, they walked towards the future. Chapter 19. Reckoning at Redemption Ridge. Despite the peace they found in their Montana valley, a nagging feeling of unfinished business persisted. Rhett knew that while Jedediah Stone was dead, the bounty on his head might still attract others. He also felt a responsibility to ensure that the corrupt sheriff of Haven's End and any other co-conspirators were brought to justice. He couldn't truly build a new life with Lori until the shadows of his past were fully addressed. Lori, initially resistant to the idea of returning to danger, understood Rhett's need for closure. She also felt a responsibility to Sarah, who had risked her life for them, and to the memory of Silas, the saloon owner who had been killed because of Rhett. They decided to return to Redemption Ridge, not to reclaim their old lives, but to seek a final reckoning, to expose the corruption and ensure that justice was served. They knew it was a dangerous undertaking, but they were prepared to face whatever awaited them, together. Jake, now fully recovered, insisted on joining them. He felt a debt of honor to Rhett and Lori, and he was determined to make amends for his past betrayal. Sarah, too, decided to return, her loyalty to her friends unwavering. The journey back to Redemption Ridge was filled with a sense of foreboding. They were returning to a place of violence and betrayal, a place that held both painful memories and a glimmer of hope for redemption. As they approached the town, they were met with an eerie silence. The streets were deserted, the buildings empty, the saloon doors hanging open, creaking in the wind. It was as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for their arrival. They soon discovered the reason for the silence. Word of Stone's death and the sheriff's corruption had spread, and the remaining residents of Redemption Ridge, fearing retribution, had fled. The town was a ghost of its former self, a shell of its lawless past. In the center of town, they found a single figure waiting for them. It was the territorial marshal, a stern-faced man with a reputation for honesty and integrity. He had received reports of the events in Redemption Ridge and Haven's End, and he had come to investigate. Rhett, Lori, Sarah, and Jake told the marshal their story, detailing the corruption, the betrayal, the violence they had endured. They provided evidence, names, and details, leaving nothing out. The marshal listened intently, his expression grim. He knew of Stone's reputation, and he had suspected the sheriff of Haven's End of wrongdoing. He was grateful for their information, for their courage in coming forward. He assured them that he would investigate thoroughly, that he would bring the remaining corrupt officials to justice. He also informed Rhett that the bounty on his head had been lifted, that his actions in self-defense and in exposing the corruption had been deemed justifiable. Rhett felt a wave of relief wash over him. He was finally free, his name cleared, his past no longer a threat to his future. He had sought redemption, and he had found it, not in violence, but in truth and justice. Lori stood beside him, her hand in his, her heart filled with pride and love. She had witnessed his transformation, his journey from outlaw to a man of honor, a man who had fought for what was right. They spent a few days in Redemption Ridge, helping the marshal with his investigation, providing testimony, ensuring that all the loose ends were tied up. They visited Silas's grave, paying their respects to the man who had lost his life because of Rhett. As they prepared to leave, to return to their Montana valley, they felt a sense of closure, a sense of peace. They had faced their demons, had confronted their past, and had emerged victorious. The reckoning at Redemption Ridge was not the violent confrontation they had expected, but a quiet, somber affair, a testament to the power of truth and justice to overcome even the darkest of shadows. It was a final goodbye to their old lives, a farewell to the violence and the betrayal, and a hopeful embrace of their new beginning. The town, once a symbol of lawlessness and despair, now held a glimmer of hope for a brighter future, a future where justice prevailed and the innocent were protected. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts and horizons. Returning to their Montana valley felt like coming home. The air was crisp and clean, the scent of pine filling their lungs, the majestic mountains standing as silent sentinels over their newfound sanctuary. They had faced the darkness, confronted their past, and emerged with a love that had been tested and proven true. But even in this idyllic setting, a final confrontation awaited them, not of guns and violence, but of hearts and horizons. It was time to fully embrace their future, to solidify their commitment, to become husband and wife. They decided on a simple ceremony, held by the stream that ran through their valley, under the vast, open sky. Sarah and Jake would be their witnesses, their companions in this journey of redemption and new beginnings. Lori crafted a simple dress from a bolt of fabric Sarah had brought from Redemption Ridge, a soft, flowing gown that reflected the beauty of their surroundings. Rhett wore a clean shirt and a new pair of trousers, his rugged features softened by a smile that reached his eyes. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the valley, they stood by the stream, their hands clasped together, their hearts filled with love and anticipation. Jake, standing beside Sarah, cleared his throat and began to read a passage from the worn book of poetry that Rhett treasured, the words echoing through the stillness of the evening. Then, Rhett and Lori spoke their vows, simple words that carried the weight of their shared experiences, their trials and tribulations, their unwavering love for each other. They promised to be true to each other, to support each other, to cherish each other, for as long as they both shall live. There were no rings, no elaborate ceremony, just a heartfelt exchange of promises, a testament to the enduring power of love to overcome adversity, to heal old wounds, to create a new beginning. As they kissed, sealing their vows, Lori felt a sense of completeness, a sense of belonging, a sense of peace she had never known before. She was no longer Loretta Monroe, the broken woman who had fled a brutal marriage. She was Lori Dawson, the wife of the man she loved, the partner in a new life, a woman of strength and resilience, a woman who had found her home. Rhett held her close, his heart overflowing with love and gratitude. He had been a lost soul, a man haunted by his past, but Lori had shown him the way, had given him hope, had given him a reason to live, a reason to love. Sarah and Jake congratulated them, their faces beaming with happiness for their friends. They had all been through so much together, had faced danger and adversity, had found redemption and new beginnings. They spent the evening celebrating, sharing a simple meal, laughing, talking, dreaming of their future. They would build their ranch, raise their horses, create a life filled with love, peace, and happiness. As the stars emerged, filling the vast Montana sky, Lori and Rhett stood hand in hand, gazing at the beauty of their surroundings, their hearts filled with gratitude and hope. They had faced their final confrontation, not with guns and violence, but with love and commitment. They had conquered their demons, had embraced their future, and had found their happily ever after, not in a fairy tale, but in the rugged reality of the American West. Their journey had been long and arduous, filled with trials and tribulations, but it had led them to this moment, to this place, to this love. The final confrontation was not a battle with external foes, but an internal reckoning, a final acceptance of their past, and a wholehearted embrace of their future, together. The horizon stretched before them, vast and unknown, but they faced them hand in hand, their hearts intertwined, their love a beacon of hope in the vast, beautiful, and sometimes cruel landscape of their new life. They would face everything together and build the life they had almost lost the chance to claim. Epilogue. Years passed. The ranch flourished. The valley, once silent and secluded, now echoed with the sounds of life, of laughter, of children playing, of horses galloping across the open fields. Rhett and Lori had built their dream, their home, their legacy. They had 2 children, a son named Samuel, after Lori's father, a tribute to the man she had once been, and a daughter named Sarah, after their dear friend, a testament to the loyalty and courage that had bound them together. Jake had stayed with them, becoming a valuable member of their ranching family, his past mistakes forgiven, his loyalty unwavering. Sarah had found love with a neighboring rancher, a kind and gentle man who cherished her strength and her spirit. Rhett and Lori often sat on their porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of orange and purple, their hands clasped together, their hearts filled with gratitude. They had weathered many storms, had faced countless challenges, but their love had endured, had grown stronger, had become the foundation of their lives. The scars of the past remained, a reminder of the hardships they had endured, but they were no longer a source of pain, but a testament to their resilience, their courage, their unwavering commitment to each other. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching their grandchildren play, Lori turned to Rhett, her eyes filled with a love that had deepened with time. "Do you ever regret it, Rhett?" she asked. "The life we chose? The dangers we faced?" Rhett smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners, his weathered face reflecting the wisdom of years. "Never, Lori," he said. "Not for a single moment. I found you. That's all that matters." He leaned in and kissed her, a gentle, tender kiss that spoke of a love that had spanned decades, a love that had conquered all, a love that would endure for eternity. The valley, their sanctuary, their home, was a testament to their enduring spirit, their unwavering love, their triumph over adversity. They had built a life filled with peace, happiness, and a profound sense of belonging. They had found their happily ever after, not in a fairy tale, but in the rugged reality of the American West, a love story etched in the landscape, whispered by the wind, a testament to the enduring power of the human heart. Their life was a living embodiment of second chances, resilience, and the transformative power of love found in the most unexpected of places. They lived and they loved, with the mountains watching over their peaceful valley, a timeless story. The end.